we have Beverly Schwartz. Bev taught elementary school for 35 years, which hats off to that, Bev.
Thanks.
And she started storytelling a couple years ago, and she loves telling about her life and her experience. And this story is a variant from our monthly theme, which is fine. This one she calls Titanic. So take it away, Bev.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. First of all, Andy, I loved your story. I
Oh,
do.
thank you.
And getting to know your mother for who she really was, it was very, very special. So enjoy every moment you have with her.
Yes, thank you. I do. Yeah.
Okay, my story is Finding the Titanic. Well, I have a story for all of you tonight, and it's a true story. I was invited to be a keynote speaker at the New York State Engineering Society in the capital, Albany. And there's about 1,000 engineers, most of them men, there for the conference. So I got invited, I walked up to the stage, and who was there was David Ballard, the scientist who found the Titanic. We both gave our speeches. He was wonderful. That was the first time I had ever been a keynote speaker. I was kind of nervous. And afterwards, we had a luncheon, and they sat us together at a round table with all these other engineering men that were like owners of their own firms. Well, everyone was asking them very scientific questions. And I just sat there. No one was asking me anything. And I was listening. And then the food came, and blah, 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 everyone started eating. And I looked at David Ballard and I said, "Can I ask you a question? It's not a scientific question, it's a humanist question." He smiled. He said, "I would love to. I get these questions everywhere I go. I know what they're going to ask me. I would love a different question for once." I said, "Okay." I looked at him. Was there anything that was scary or weird or frightening that happened while you were finding the Titanic? His eyes popped open. There was, but I've never very rarely told this story. I said, "Oh, I would love to hear it." And he says, "Come a little closer, Bev. I don't want the whole table to be listening to this story." And so we went shoulder to shoulder, and we looked in each other's eyes, and I leaned forward. What was he going to tell me? He said, "Well, we had been on many, many, many trips trying to find the Titanic for a couple years. One of our scientists designed the submarine. He had a window that we could look out, only one at a time could look out to see what we were seeing on the bottom of the ocean, to see if we were getting near the Titanic. We found many old boats that had sunk. And in each, we saw the debris field that's always around a sunken ship. You'll see chests and chairs and broken china and silverware. And every time we'd get excited, it wasn't the Titanic. So I was looking out the window. We started seeing debris. There's old trunks and other items that looked like it could have come from the age of the Titanic when it went down. And he was looking out the window, seeing all this debris, and all of a sudden, whoosh, a doll's porcelain head was right in front of him in the window, and its eyes were blinking right at him. He had this terrible feeling inside his stomach, he said. He realized this is probably a child's doll's head that went down, maybe being held by a little girl going down with the boat. It was maybe her family went down with her and died also with her. And he said, I was a scientist. I was always thinking about the science of everything, but the humanist side of real people died, hit him. And then just then, whoosh, the doll's head moved away. Oh my goodness. He said, there's a stream that sometimes goes around sunken ships. Things that go down in ships get caught in this stream. And forever and ever, they go round and round the sunken boat. He said, I think we're coming close to whatever this boat is. Oh, I think it's the Titanic. And whoosh, all of a sudden, the doll's head came back. And again, the doll's eyes blinked a few times, and whoosh, the doll's head went away. And behind the doll's head this time was the Titanic. This had been a doll that went down with a little girl on the Titanic. Now, the scientists and him had decided they weren't going to tell anyone where the Titanic was located because this was a graveyard. It was sacred. They didn't want everyone in the world to come and find the Titanic and start taking things from the ocean floor and the boat and the surrounding area. So they took the pictures, they took the movies, they got the proof, but to this day, no one knows really where the Titanic sunk. Well, I said, that could be scary. I have a porcelain head doll from when I was a little girl, and I know the eyes go up and down. And he shook his head and goes, yeah, that was really beyond belief. I said, well, as I told you, I taught third grade, and we were been studying about you and the Titanic. And my kids are going to ask me one question. And he said, and what's that? Were there any skeletons? Did you see any skeletons on the savannah? That's a third grader. He laughed. Skeletons. Well, we ate our lunch and everyone's saying goodbye to him at the end. And I'm waiting my turn to say goodbye. And he said, Bev, no one else was left. He goes, do you have a piece of paper? And I said, yeah. Can I write your class a letter? Oh, they would love it. I'm going to tell this story tomorrow as soon as I get to school. And he wrote a letter to my class. It was so nice. And I thanked him so much. And he said, I think your kids might enjoy this story. I said, they certainly will. So the next day, I couldn't wait to get to school. And I got the paper and I said, oh, I told the kids all about what happened and at the event. And I read the letter to the kids. And then I said, I have a story to tell you that he told me. And I told the story. And you know what my kids asked me the first thing after I was done? Were there any skeletons? Thank you.
Thank you, Bev. That was wonderful. Well told. Good story.
Thank you.
A lot of suspense, a lot of heart. I just love that story. It seems to just have everything. Well done. And thanks for staying up late. I know it's 10 o'clock. You're 10 o'clock, right?
My friend's falling asleep.
But
He's
I
going,
heard- I
he's
heard
going
the
to
story.
bed. You heard it, right?
He's heard it before.
He's going
Okay.
up to bed. He's tired, but I'm going to try to stay around as long as I can.
Well, tell him if he hangs in there, he'll hear a story he hasn't heard before. Coming up next is John Petrick, and John is a wonderful friend of ours. He's a recent storyteller. He met Ed Lewis and joined the Sacramento Guild, but John's only been a teller for a couple of years, and so he has never told in person. He's only told by Zoom. So isn't that interesting? And now John is going to share a story with us. And Gail, you'll be up next after John. And John is going to tell us about Mom's Last Rebellion. John, unmute yourself. Good. Take it away.
Thank you. I've been having a few gaps in my internet coverage, so I hope I can make it through without failing. um, so, as Mark said, this one's called Mom's Last Rebellion. Well, my mom was raised the only child of a successful immigrant businessman. And they weren't country club set or anything, but country clubs didn't accept immigrants, but they were comfortable. But somehow she fell in love with this handsome farm kid who was dirt poor and hadn't even finished high school because of the Depression. But those snapping blue eyes lured her in and she married him and they moved to the farm. They didn't even have electricity the first year they were there. Well, in the 50s and 60s, when Mom was raising us kids, men were the king of the roost and women were expected to be obedient wives and mothers. Get your kids to church on Sunday and make sure they raise their kids the same. But farm wives had a lot more expectations than other wives. You had to get 3 big meals a day out to dad and all the help in the big family. Mom had this huge garden. She canned probably hundreds of quarts of fruit and vegetables every summer. She raised chickens and ducks for the meat and eggs and actually personally butchered them, 50 chickens and a dozen ducks or more per year. And of course, the biggest job was raising 8 kids in a big Catholic family. Well, obviously it wasn't an easy life. And sometimes Dad didn't help. Dad was very demanding and he angered easily. It was Dad's way or the highway. And most of the time, us kids and Mom fell into line. He didn't yell, but he was the master of the angry stare or the angry silent pout. Us kids would just run and hide. Well, Mom tried to be the good farm wife and she tried to obey Dad sometimes, most of the time. But I don't think she ever got over wanting to move back to town. I think the 2 things that got her through were the love of her children and baking. With 8 kids, a batch of cookies or a cake doesn't last a day, but there was always more. Cakes and pies and cookies, breads, rolls. Mom bought flour in 50-pound bags like bakeries do. Well, as us kids got older, those roles of mother and baker became a little less fulfilling and Mom needed to find something for herself. And she started to buck Dad a little bit. One of the first things I remember is how Mom, by mistake, voted for McGovern. My dad had been a Kennedy Democrat, but over the years he'd gotten more and more conservative. Well, Mom had been home raising kids for 30 years, and one day she goes into town to get a job against Dad's strong objection. Well, that only lasted a couple months. Apparently, the arguments weren't worth it. But the biggest surprise was when Mom left the church. Dad and Mom had been tough Catholics. And the church in her town of Yankton, South Dakota, had gotten too small. So they're going to build a second church in town. Well, that old church is where Mom had spent a lot of her life, 65 years. She'd been baptized there. She went to grade school there. She was confirmed there. She was married there, buried her parents there. All of her kids were baptized there. Most of her kids were married there too. And yet an edict came down from the bishop that people that lived over here were all going to go to the new church, and people that lived over here were going to go to the old church. Well, Mom was in the new church, and she, at 65, she said no, she wasn't going to do it. She quit going to church at age 65. So every Sunday, Dad would go to church, and Mom would stay home and watch Mass on TV. The hilarious part was that the local station only carried the Mass in Spanish, and Mom didn't understand a word. I don't know if she ever set foot in that new church. Well, time kind of wore people out, and maybe Mom wore Dad out a little bit. Then finally, they bought a house in Yankton, in town. It took them 2 or 3 years to actually move there before Dad actually would do it. But he eventually retired from the farm, and they moved into town, and Mom had got to shed the role of the farm life and had time to do some activities and stuff she wanted to do, and it was great. Well, that house in Yankton, that was on a hillside, had lots of steps. Mowing the lawn was tough, even for a young person. And when Dad got cancer in 2008, Mom knew that she was not going to be able to take care of Dad and that house. But Dad, of course, refused to move to an assisted living center. They had just built a new one out on the edge of town, and they could get a private apartment there with help for any other needs that they had. Some of Mom's friends were already moved there, and some of her relatives, and they liked it. But every time Mom would bring it up, Dad would go, "Hell no." Well, one day, Mom snuck off to the assisted living center and put a deposit down on the apartment. But she didn't tell Dad, because she knew after 60 years of marriage that when something like this happened that was going to start a fight, she had to find just the right moment to break the news. Well, about a week later, Dad was scheduled for some surgery on his kidneys. And when they opened him up, they found that the cancer mass was so huge that the surgery was no use. And a few days later, his kidneys failed and he died almost immediately. Well, Mom had never gotten around to telling Dad about the new apartment. So after 60 years of marriage, through some lucky but tragic timing, Mom had finally gotten her way.
Thank you, John. Well done. Well told. And I'm going to have some very positive comments for you in the chat. John has asked me for feedback, and well done. Really well done. You must have practiced or something, but we won't go into that now. Gail is coming to us, and Gail is brave enough that she is going to try her very first ever in her life Zoom storytelling with us tonight. So Gail, is it pronounced Ryall? Somebody unmute Gail, or unmute yourself, Gail. Oh, I lost track of her. Gail, can you unmute? There we go. Is it Ryall?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My story is called Like a Mother to Me Now. And can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Take it away.
When 49 years ago, my second child, Sabrina, was born. It was much easier to give birth to her than it was to her elder brother, who was a couple of years older. Anyway, when she was about 4, my husband and I broke up, and he agreed to contribute to the support of the children as long as they could spend every weekend with him and all the holidays. So I agreed. Well, a few years later, when Sabrina was 8 years old, and Dylan was a few years, 2 years older, on Thanksgiving Day, my ex-husband decided that he would go down to Oakland, where my sister lived, and have Thanksgiving dinner with her. She was a rare cook. So on their way, about halfway between Davis, where he lived, and Oakland, another car that was going in the opposite direction. And I guess the driver had started his drinking much too early. Anyway, he lost control of his car, came across the divider, and hit into my ex-husband's car. And the car was totaled, and all 3 of them were injured. My ex-husband had a broken arm and a leg and a slight concussion. My son Dylan had his spine broken, and he's been wheelchaired ever since. And Sabrina, who was 8 years old, hit her head and lost some of her teeth and was in a coma for a month. Of course, they were taken to the nearest hospital. And when I found out about it, I tried to get down there as soon as I could. On the parking lot of the hospital, which was about halfway between Davis and Oakland, and really too far for me to drive every day. On the parking lot, there was a small house trailer that was for rent. And I rented it so I could go see them every day. They had put them in the children's ward in the same room, Dylan and Sabrina. And I was able to go to see them every morning and spend the night in the little trailer. Well, as I said, the accident happened on Thanksgiving Day. As Christmas came on, I got books. I read stories to Dylan, and every morning I would brush Sabrina's hair, and but she was pretty non-responsive. As Christmas came on, I went and bought some Christmas stockings for them, put some candy in them, and then I bought some paperback books for Dylan, who was at that point able to sit up and read in his bed. And I bought a plastic toy horse for Sabrina. Sabrina had never met a real horse, but she was very fond of toy horses and had a whole collection of plastic horses. Well, on Christmas Day, I gave Dylan his stocking, and then I suggested that he should open the stocking for Sabrina. So I have a picture, I have a photograph of him, which don't have here to show you, of him in his wheelchair with a back brace on him. And he was opening her stocking. And when she saw the horse, she smiled. And it was the best Christmas gift I had ever had. Well, she was beginning to wake up. And as the day grew on, as the time grew on, I decided to see if she could read. And I wrote, because she had been able to read before, and I tested her, and I wrote the word nose. And I said to her, this word is about something on your face. Touch the thing that's on your face. And at first she touched the word. I said, no, touch the thing that's on your face. And she touched her nose. Oh, that was wonderful. Then I thought I would try to see if she could write. Well, she could spell, but her writing was really very bad. And in fact, it still is. From that time on, she began to get better. And she couldn't speak well for a while. When I asked her what her name was, she said, Amiga. She could say Sabrina, but eventually she was able to do that. Well, now I'm 81 years old. I'll be 82 later on in a few months. And I can't walk very well. I can't drive anymore. I have to use a cane just to walk the length of my house. And I have some cats that I can't take care of. So Sabrina, she went back to school. At first, her teachers complained because her handwriting was so bad, and they couldn't really understand her. But that got better. Now she's She comes every morning, and uh, she feeds the cats for me. She drives me to the dentist and to the doctor and anywhere I have to go. She's like a mother to me now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gail. Oh, what a touching story. Thank you for introducing us to Sabrina and your relationship. You're very warm. Not an easy story to tell, but very warm, very heartwarming, very touching. And thank you for that. And thank you for being brave enough to tell us on Zoom your first time. So well done. Appreciate you. Mike Thompson, you're up next. And after Mike will be Dave Tarvin. You'll be up after Mike. So Mike Thompson is an interesting guy. I love hearing him tell. He's like Gail just did. He can bring a tear to my eye almost every time that he tells a story. So we'll see what he has in store for us tonight. Mike lives up by North San Juan. Andy, up by your cabin. He lives up there full time. Andy has a cabin up off of Tyler Foote, Mike. So Mike's a contractor and an amazing storyteller. One of the reasons is because he has lived in two worlds in one lifetime. Take it away, Mike.
Thank you, Mark. Wanted to also thank Gail. How nice to share your first telling with us. As storytellers, we talk about doing our emotional homework, because sometimes some of these stories touch us so deeply that it's encouraging to see that after this long, the experiences are so poignant for you. And it really meets my need for hope to hear that your sister or your daughter has come forward, and that all of your love and caring is being reciprocated now. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you to the other tellers too. The story, as I was speaking to Mark today, and he said, you know, we've got another slot available. Do you have a mom story? Gosh, so many of our moms want to be super moms. And I sometimes wonder, is it something that society tells them, and is that burden or that blessing put on them by their families or by themselves? So often moms do give of themselves to the point that they seem to collapse and lose their own identity as they become everyone else's chauffeur and message taker and secretary, nurse, all the things that moms do simultaneously. And this particular story is about a friend's mom. She was also put in that role of being super mom. Everyone believed that she could take care of whatever they needed done. So she would be assigned tasks, from the children to her husband to the neighbors. Everyone would tell her what to do. And I think her way of rebelling was that she would forget things. And she would forget the shopping list they had given her. They would forget the appointments that they said she just had to remember and somehow didn't. She'd forget the tag for the dry cleaner and wouldn't be able to pick up the laundry. And in so many ways, she lost so many things, that she even lost their respect. She lost her family's respect to the extent that when her husband died, he had so little faith in her that he didn't just say community property and you get it all because I'm dead. No, he left a trust for her. So she had a gas card. She had a small allowance, because really everyone thought, you know, she needs someone to take care of her. In fact, a lot of people weren't even aware that she could drive. So the gas card was a surprise to them. But about 3 weeks after her husband died, everyone was really surprised, because she announced to them, I'm going to go on a road trip. I said, Mom, a road trip. What does that mean? She says, I'm going to take the car and I'm going to go off and discover America. I said, well, Mom, you've never taken a trip on your own before. And she says, I know. So I think it's about time. She says, I'm going to go discover America. This was in the days before cell phones. The only way they had of keeping track of her was that they had the bank statements. They forwarded directly to them, and they could look and they could follow and see where she had purchased gas. And she was gone without checking in for months. 3 months later, she came home. Oh my, if they were critical before, you should hear them now. Mom, what were you thinking? Mom, you didn't call, you could have called, you could have been hurt. And oh, they had such imaginations of all the terrible things that could have happened to this poor woman. None of them had happened. Mom, you should have been telling us where you were. You should have been checking in. And just as she had handled their criticisms all through her life, she just smiled. Because she knew she could be a super mom. They didn't have to know it, acknowledge it. But the one real bone of contention, the one thing that the family looked at and just could not understand, he said, Mom, the AAA statement here, you've been gone 3 months and you have 86 incidents. 86 times you've called AAA. Explain this to us. She says, your father was always so well controlled. Your father, he kept the tires full and the oil checked and the gas tank full. And in all the years that we paid AAA, we never called them once. They took our money all those years. You know what? They can afford to take care of me now. I said, but Mom, 86 times in 3 months? What was going wrong? She says, I forget my keys. They'll open your car for you if you forget your keys. I said, but Mom, they make these little boxes that hold on with a magnet. You can have extra keys made. You can put them in your purse. There are so many ways to deal with this, Mom. And she smiled. She says, yeah, I know. Mom, what could you possibly be? And everyone was critical. Everyone was trying to remind her of how she had failed. And then it hit me. I looked at her and I said, Mom, I said, tell me something. Do you have a thing for tow truck drivers? Oh, she smiled. She smiled with one of those smiles that doesn't take words, and you just know. And she says, let me tell you about tow truck drivers. She says, tow truck drivers, when you call them, they come and they have one thing on their mind, and that is, how can I help you? She says, very often they own their own business, or at least they have full-time work. She says, most of them, they wear a uniform. She says, and you gotta love a man in uniform. She says, they come, they want to help. And she says, and when they hear that your husband just died and that you're traveling across the country alone, she said, very often they will call their dispatcher and go off duty. She says, they'll tell you the best place to eat in their town, and often they'll take you there and they'll insist on paying. She said, they'll tell you where to stay, that you'll be safe. They'll tell you the things that you have to see before you leave. She says, tow truck drivers, they'll take care of you so well. She sat back and smiled. Many people in her family were still incredulous, but I looked at her and I had a whole new respect for this incredible woman as she set out to discover America. And in the process, she found herself and she found tow truck drivers.
Thank you, Mike. What a great story. Well done. I really thank you for sharing that with us. I happen to know that, well, you have your own business, but it could be a tow truck business, because I happen to know that you're one of the guys that whenever you show up, what your thought is and what's on your lips is, how can I help? So no wonder that story came from you, and I really appreciate it and appreciate you. Thanks for squeezing us into your busy schedule. Well done. And next up is Dave Tarvin. And Dave, feel free to unmute yourself. And Dave Tarvin is a guy that I so admire, coming from Toastmasters and learning stories and writing stories and adapting stories and telling them every chance he gets, and also introduced me to hats. And now I have a couple, thanks to Dave. So take it away, Mr. Tarvin.
All right, well, great story so far. Everybody did great. Gail, I gotta say, took a lot of courage to do this for the first time, and you did wonderful. It was a very touching story. Thank you for sharing that. And so the title of my story is Odds and Ends, and it begins like this. I was sitting in my grandfather's old truck, and my grandmother was driving. And I swear to God, half the time I was praying. I wasn't sure where we were going, but I'd been sitting in that truck for about an hour and a half. We had left Northridge, which is in the Los Angeles Valley, the Basin, and we were starting up the mountain. And I had no idea where we were going, and my grandmother was kind of upset. And I was really nervous because, you see, my grandmother was deaf. She couldn't hear anything, but she could drive. She had a driver's license, and she had to really concentrate and watch what she was doing. So there was no conversation. And this old truck was Grandpa's old work truck. There was no radio in that truck. There was no nothing. And all I could do was sit there in that heat, getting jostled by that old truck and wondering where the heck we were going and what we were doing. And my only clue was that Grandma had been upset earlier in the day. I'd been staying with her, and my grandmother had this special quilt that was laying on her bed, and it was in her bedroom, and the bedroom was off limits. Nobody ever went in there. The door was always closed, but for some reason the door was open, and the cat had got in there, climbed up on the bed, and when my grandmother found that cat, it was needling and ripping on that quilt. And she got upset. It was the only time I ever saw her got angry, and she started to cry. And she took that quilt out and she fluffed it out and put it over the couch. And then she drugged me outside to this old garage, and we started tearing through all these old boxes because one of the squares on the quilt had been ripped. It was torn. And she would, for the whole morning, she went through all these boxes, box after box after box. Whatever it was she was looking for, she didn't find it. The next thing I knew, it was in that old truck, going down that old highway, leaving Northridge, going to who knows where. Well, pretty soon we went up the mountain, and we came down the mountain, and we were headed towards Bakersfield, and then we turned off into a little town called Arvin. And we pulled into the town, and I had never been to a town like that. I was just a city boy. And I grew up with asphalt streets, concrete sidewalks, nice little homes all in a row, all the same. I always shopped at the strip mall, everything organized, clean, and new. This wasn't that kind of a town. This was some old town. The streets were all dirt. There was no sidewalks. The houses were tiny little homes. They all looked like those little company homes, you know. And my grandma started cruising through the town, and she said, well, we're almost there. That was the first thing she'd said in the whole trip. And the next thing I know, we pulled up in front of this house. We got out of the truck. We walked up to the door, and she started knocking on that door. This woman came to the door, and she ushered us in. My grandmother knew her. Her name was Dorothy, and we sat at this old table, and this woman brought us out lemonade, and we all sat there talking. I mean, they were talking. I was just sitting there watching them. And so this woman, Dorothy, looks over at my grandmother and she says, I know you wouldn't come out here for just no reason. She says, why are you here? And my grandmother looked at her and Dorothy looked at her. And then simultaneously, at the same time they both said it, they said, chicken linen. And they both started laughing. Now I sat there thinking, what in the heck is chicken linen? Well, they started talking, and the next thing you know, Dorothy starts to tell me the story. And Dorothy says, I was the hostess of what was called the Sack and Snack Social Club after the Depression here in Arvin. At that time, this town was a farm collective, a migrant farm labor camp, the first one in California. And this is where all the farmers who fled the South and the Midwest during the Dust Bowl days, those Grapes of Wrath days, this is where they all wound up in California, the first camp. And some of us stayed and some of us didn't. Some people like your grandmother left and went to Los Angeles, but I've always stayed here. And every week we had this social hour and women would show up with their chicken linen. And I said, what in the heck is chicken linen? And she said, well, women in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, companies would bag up things in cloth bags like flour and chicken feed. And the most popular was chicken feeds because women like myself and your grandmother, we would raise eggs and chickens for extra money. She said, myself, I used to go through 200-300 pounds of chicken feed every week. But we were so poor that money all went for food or for rent. And we didn't have any clothing. And so we would recycle that cloth and make clothes. Well, when the manufacturers knew that, they started to print up fancy designs so that we could be reused into dresses and shirts and curtains and towels, things like that. And that's what we did. So we would meet once a week and we would trade pieces of linen so that we could get enough to sew a shirt or a blouse or a pair of pants or whatever. And that's when my grandmother started speaking. She said, that's right. And that quilt that darn cat scratched up today, that ripped that piece, that was my chicken linen quilt. And every scrap, every odd, every end, every piece of fabric on that quilt, for your father, your uncles, your aunt's first blouse when she went to school, funny underwear that I made for your grandfather that they were so big, I'd never sewn before. They were so big that we could both fit into them. So I just cut them up and I used those scraps to make that quilt. And she said, all that quilt is just a collection of memories. And she said, you know what I always say, Dave, don't you? And I said, yes, Grandma, because she had this saying that she said all the time. And she would always say to me, she would say, Dave, you gotta count your blessings and you have to stitch them one by one. Well, I kind of laughed at that and they kept talking about the chicken linen. And then the next thing you know, we were out in some old barn going through it. And it took a long time, but we finally found a box with the right pattern and the right piece of chicken linen to fix that quilt. And so we drove back and my grandma went straight to her quilting room and she worked on that quilt and she worked on that quilt. And then she came back and she held it up and showed it to me. She had this big smile on her face and she said, Dave, the best things in life are quilted.
Great story, Dave. I love the way you tied in the beginning and the end. I love your closing. That was wonderful, heartwarming, and you gave us something to think about all in one story. Well done, Dave. Really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
And Marion, you're going to be up now. And after Marion will be Ed Lewis will be after Marion. So, oh, thank you so much, Dave. And
I'm gonna
Marion,
make my announcement first.
yes, Marion has an announcement, and then her story is called A Bit of Wisdom. I can't wait to hear that. Take it away, Marion.
So I'm the head of the Delta Word Weavers. We're out of Antioch, but on Zoom for everybody now. And in June, Ed Lewis will be our featured teller. The theme is the men. In May, we had the women. Just finished that. You can go on the SAC website to see the review of the women's story. So we're gonna have the men in June. That will be June 13th, because Delta Word Weavers meets on the second Sunday in the afternoon at 2 o'clock. In July, the Word Weavers have no meeting. I get a month off, yay. But in August, on August 8th, second Sunday, Bill Matnick, musician, now storyteller, will be the featured teller then. The theme then, in part because he wrote Heart of a Man, a new book that's out. It's a wonderful book. It's all men's stories. He couldn't come in June. Anyway, he will be featured in August, on August 8th. So I think the theme then, I'll combine them, have guys and gals, or a theme, something such as that for August. So June 13th and August 8th will be Word Weavers, 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoons. Thank you. My story is called, yes, A Bit of Wisdom. And have you ever had, like when you were young, did anybody give you a bit of wisdom that you just held on to all of your life? I have. I was raised in Sacramento. I was raised in a family with 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. There was a day that, well, when I was in 6th grade and my younger brother in 5th, we were going to Sutterville School, elementary school. Our big brother and sister, they were already at McClatchy and Joaquin Miller, but my younger one and I, Sutterville School, we were headed for. But just before we got out the door and we were going to ride our bikes that day, we remembered today is music day. Mr. Perrin's coming. We've got to take our instruments. So we went back into the house. Wayne picked up his cornet and I picked up my viola. This viola, I had been playing the violin. That was my size, but Mr. Perrin wanted a viola player and he asked me, this viola is too big, I'm too little. But he insisted that I play it, and I did. But picking up that viola, oh, it was heavier. We headed out to the garage to get the bikes, a girl's bike, a boy's bike, one of each. So I get to the girl's bike and I'm tiptoeing because I'm too little for this bike. And my hand is little. I'm trying to hold the handle of the viola case and the handle of the bicycle. Oh, my hand is little, but I'm tiptoeing and I get that pedal. I bring it up to the highest and I put my foot up on it and I hop up. So I'm on the bike, riding down the street now. Yes, Noonan Drive, Pleasant Drive, up windy Del Rio Road and up over the railroad track we went. When we were at the top of the railroad track, that viola case just bumped right against the fender of that blue Schwinn. This was the girl's bike, a 1-speed blue Schwinn, a basket on the front, fenders on it. Yes, the girl's bike. And Wayne, he had the boy's bike. At the railroad levee, now we're only 2 blocks from Sutterville School. Well, I'm in 6th grade. 6th graders, they're out in the bungalows. So we parked the bikes in the bike racks. There were a lot of bikes. And I went out to the bungalows, lined up. The bell rang. I was in Mr. Leaf's class. We went on in, sat in place. He took roll. And right after roll, he said, Marion Eastburn, Kristen Otto and Linda Steppen, at recess, I want you to go in to see Miss Madigan. She's going to talk to you about yard girl duty. Why is anybody talking to me about yard girl duty? I can't do that. But at recess, my buddies, Kristen and Linda, they're going, come on, Marion, come on, we got to go to Miss Madigan's class. And I'm going, I can't. But my buddies got me there. We listened to Miss Madigan. She talked about fairness, safety, and leadership, but I'm barely listening. I can't do this. Why am I even here? I'm too little. You know, when I'm out on a playground, those third graders and me, we're like the same height. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference between me and them. I can't do this. I'm too little. And I'm tired of everybody going, pipsqueak, short stuff. How's the weather down there? No, I can't do this. I'm too little. Miss Madigan told us to do this, to go home and talk to our parents and come back the next day to officially sign up. Well, I thought about it. Yeah, I thought about it. I'm not doing this. That's what I thought about. And then on the way home, when brother and I were riding our bikes home, I thought, I know, I'm going to talk to Mom. She's going to understand, because on her first teaching job, she told me, her first teaching job, they said, Miss Evans, you will not be assigned to the upper grades. You are too short. You will be assigned to teach primary grades. So I got home and I told Mom about Miss Madigan and yard girl duty, and I can't do this. And she just looked at me. She said, Marion, you know, it's not what's on the outside that counts. It's what's on the inside. You can do this. Oh, she must have forgotten her predicament. Oh, but I thought about it at night. And in the morning, I barely got any sleep. And the next day at recess, Kristen and Linda, they're dragging me, and I still don't want to do it. And I still don't, but they drugged me to Miss Madigan's class. And oh, all right. And I signed it. Well, by the next week, Miss Madigan had given us a clipboard and a Sutterville school pencil. And she gave us the Sutterville yard girl duty hat. It was a sailor hat with the brim turned up and the yellow stitching. The school colors are blue and yellow. Sutterville School Yard Girls. I had my clipboard and my pencil, and I even got a whistle. It was on a rope. Yes, I am there for safety and fairness. I had my duty. Alan Morrell, you are not being safe. Look at you going down the slide backwards, Alan Morrell. Carol Berg, you're counting to 25 too fast for your turn on the swing. That's too fast. That's not fair. Carol Berg. And at the end of recess, I turned it into Miss Madigan. I worked all year as a yard girl duty. I learned about safety and fairness and leadership. But mostly I remembered Mom's bit of wisdom. I had to carry it all through my childhood. I was the shortest one in every class till I got to high school, and Charlotte was shorter than me. I always remembered, and throughout adulthood too, Mom's bit of wisdom. It's not what's on the outside, it is what's on the inside that counts. Now in 2001, my mother was in hospice. We cared for her at home. We children assisted the caregiver that we had into the house. And I thought about this bit of wisdom she'd given me. So I went into her room and she was propped up in bed. And I talked to her. And I told her this little story about, remember when I was in 6th grade and I was going to do yard girl duty? She didn't remember. I didn't think she would, but that was okay. Because I, from my heart, wanted to share with her that story once again. And I told her and said, thank you, Mom, for that bit of wisdom. It's not what's on the outside, but it is what's on my inside that has counted. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. Well done. Good story, well told. And what a wonderful bit of wisdom that we can certainly all use and pass on to our younger kinfolk. So thank you for that. That was good on all levels. I really enjoyed it. And now our good buddy Ed Lewis. Ed Lewis is one of the major people in storytelling in Woodland and California and Davis and Auburn and Sacramento and everywhere else. And Ed, I really appreciate you. And I've told you that to your face many times. I appreciate you and all that you do for the oral tradition and the art of storytelling. I'm really glad that I get to call you friend. And after Ed is going to be Karen Daly. So take it away, Ed.
All right. I had planned to tell a story that I've been working on, but I've really been inspired by all these stories. And I'm going to tell a story about my mother. Hopefully I can get through it without too many tears. I'm just going to share remembrances because I have not developed a story. So let me go here. When I remember my mother, I am enveloped in unconditional love. All throughout my life, my mother gave me that unconditional love that I could rely upon anytime. She passed in 94, but I can open the doorway to that love whenever I need it. My mom was born on a small island in southern Alaska next to Juneau. I think the island was called Richard Island. She had 3 brothers, 3 sisters, and her parents had come fleeing Denmark from a famine. They couldn't get into the United States, but they made it into Canada. And my grandfather was a machinist and he could do any kind of work. He did a lot of work on boats. They made their way across Canada and eventually they got into Alaska and he began his business there where people would come up in their boats, they'd dock into a barge that he had built and he would work on their engines. It was a self-sufficient family. Everyone learned skills. They learned traditional skills for men and women. My mother was an amazing seamstress. As a child, she made my clothes, all my costumes for Halloween. And in high school, they brought their boat down into Seattle. And they built a barge there and they tied it up next to their boat. And she lived there for about 4 years, and then everybody headed back up except her and her brother. They stayed on there. And that's at a high school dance is where she met my father. And they fell in love. And shortly after that, they got married. Now, she was born in 1919. During the war, my father went to the front in Germany, and my mother worked with her sister, who was a WAC, and her sister was part of the intelligence operations that interpreted intercepted messages from Japanese soldiers and military people. They had a small house apartment up in Capitol Hill in Seattle, And they waited for my father to come home. And when he came home, my Aunt Helen married and they moved up to the San Juan Islands. Well, my dad and mom bought a small house and they wanted to have children, but it wasn't possible for my father for the injuries that he had obtained in the war. So they looked for adoption. And my mother had a good friend that was a nurse who worked for a private physician. And that was her doctor also. Well, they tried to do the adoption process through the legal network, but it was just a huge waiting list. And they had wanted to adopt a boy and then a girl was their plan, 2 years apart. But they were getting nowhere. Her friend, who was a nurse, told her that there was a young woman who had 2 boys that were 4 and 2, and she was pregnant by a GI who was long gone, and there was no way that she could raise another child. She was going to put that child up for adoption. And so my parents said, let's work it out between us. And they did the legal paperwork, but that child was me. They took care of my birth mother all throughout her pregnancy. They put her up in a hospital, took care of her food needs. And then they said the worst time of their life was waiting 10 days after my birth, because you had to wait 10 days in the hospital before you were being adopted, before you could be adopted out. But my birth mother did pass me on to the most loving parents, and I am so thankful to her and for what she did for me, putting me with 2 of the most amazing people. Now, I told you, my mom, it was unconditional love with her. People gravitated towards her. She had this energy of love and giving. All throughout my life, she was a stay-at-home mom. I would come home after school, cookies and milk, loving hug, and then I would be out for the day until dinner time. And she would have a nice dinner prepared. And then after dinner, we would sit in front of the fireplace and play games. And she would listen to me. My dad, on the other hand, was a little bit more critical, and that's a whole nother story about my relationship with my father. But my mom was always there for me with unconditional love and this listening. I could tell her anything. I had many wonderful times with her. And then I got drafted during the Vietnam War. And when I came back to the United States, I had 18 months of service left. And I was stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington, which was only 30 miles away from where my parents lived. So I could go home on the weekends. I didn't realize at the time, nobody knew much about it, but I suffered PTSD. I was going into a deep depression and abusing drugs. And I finally went to my mom, and she just enveloped me. And I sobbed uncontrollably. But I knew I was safe with her. But what I really needed, in addition to that, was a connection with my father, who was seen as stern and critical and unemotional. And she brokered a get together with my father and myself to help us understand each other. And that my father was brought up in an era where men didn't show their emotions, but that I was brought up in an era where I could communicate my emotions and I'd be vulnerable. And she helped him understand that. And she brokered that peace. And when that happened, that freed me really to be who I was and kick this drug addiction I was experiencing in the military, and really opened up my world to explore who I was. Now, my mother, she was very sensitive. She knew who I was. I went to college. I got a business degree to follow my dad into business. And she listened to me. She said, have you ever thought about teaching? You seem to have a real rapport with children. And I would suggest that you look into that. Well, I did that. And that became my life's passion. And as many of you know, I became a teacher and an early childhood professor and developed all these storytelling ideas. But my mom, I think I got the storytelling bug from my mom just listening to my stories and just helping me express myself. And of course, being there, if you, I know we all just want to feel that unconditional love. There's no conditions with her. She passed in '94, shortly after hearing my first storytelling performance at Los Medanos College, the celebration with Marion Ferrante that we were putting on. I think it was the first year. And shortly after that, she went into surgery for heart valve surgery. They said there was 5% chance of any complications, but she bled through the lungs and passed away. After they told us we could see her in half hour or so in the recovery room. When the doctor came in with the news, I grabbed him. I just wailed. It was just, my dad was in shock. He didn't know what to do. And I just wailed and screamed and held that doctor and shook him. And it was probably the worst moment in my life. But I still can rely on that love whenever I need it. Thank you. Woo! That was it.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah, there's a unconditional love is rare and precious, and I'm glad that you have also experienced that. Beautiful story. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that emotionally intimate story with us. I am grateful. And now, varying from our normal procedure just a little bit, Karen Daly. Karen has something to read, and it's just beautiful. And she shared it with me, and she and I both think that it belongs in this program honoring mothers on Mother's Day month. And so it's short, but it really needs to be read, I think, to do it justice. And so here we go, Karen. Take it away. Unmute yourself.
All right, thank you. My light burned out. That's why I was up and trying to replace the light bulb, and I can't get the new light bulb to work. So I have all my other lights on, so I needed to be able to read it. Anyway, this story is called The Invisible Woman. It started to happen gradually. One day I was walking my son to school. I was holding his hand, and we were about to cross the street when the crossing guard said to him, "Who's that with you, young fella?" "Nobody," he shrugged. "Nobody?" The crossing guard and I laughed. My son was only 5 as we crossed the street, and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm a nobody. I would walk into the room and no one would notice. And I would say something to my family like, "Turn the TV down, please." And nothing would happen. Nobody would get up, not even make a move for the remote. I would stand there for a minute and then I would say it again, this time a little louder. "Would someone please turn down the TV?" Nothing. Just the other night, my husband and I were out at a party. We'd been there for about 3 hours and I was ready to leave. I noticed that he was talking to a friend from work. So I walked over, and then when there was a break in the conversation, I whispered, "I'm ready to go when you are." And he just kept on talking. It all began to make sense. The blank stares, the lack of response, the way the kids would walk into the room while I'm on the phone and would ask to be taken to the store. Instead, I'm thinking, can't you see I'm on the phone? Obviously not. No one can see I'm on the phone or cooking or sweeping the floor or even standing on my head in the corner because no one can see me at all. I'm invisible. Some days I'm only a pair of hands. More, can you fix this? Can you tie this? Can you open this? Some days I'm not a pair of hands. I'm not even a human being. I'm a clock. What time? What time is it? I'm a satellite guide to answer what number is the Disney Channel? Or I'm a car to order right around the corner at 5:30. I was certain that these hands once were held books, and the eyes that studied history, and the mind that graduated summa cum laude, but now they had disappeared into the peanut butter, never to be seen again. She's going, she's going, she's gone. One night, a group of us were having dinner, celebrating a friend from England. Janice had just gotten back from a fabulous trip, and she was going on and on about the hotel she stayed in. I was sitting there looking around to the others and feeling sorry for myself as I looked down and saw my out of date dress. It was the only thing I could find that was clean. My unwashed hair was pulled up into a banana clip, and I was afraid I could actually smell peanut butter in it. I was feeling pretty pathetic when Janice turned to me and handed me a beautifully wrapped package. And she said, I bought this just for you. It was a book of the great cathedrals of Europe. I wasn't actually sure why she had given it to me until I read her inscription. To Charlotte, with admiration for the greatness of what you are building when no one sees. In the days ahead, I would read, no, I devoured that book, and I would discover what would become to me four life-changing truths about what I could pattern my work. Number one, no one can say who built the great cathedrals. We have no records of their names. Number two, these builders gave their whole lives to work on these cathedrals and never see it finished. Three, they made great sacrifices and expected no credit. And four, the passion of their building was fueled by their faith that the eyes of God saw everything. A legendary story in the book told of a rich man who came to visit a cathedral while it was being built. And he saw a workman carving meticulously this tiny bird inside a beam. He was puzzled and asked the man, why are you spending so much time carving that bird into a beam that will be covered by a roof? No one will ever see it. And the workman replied, because God sees it. I closed the book, feeling the missing piece falling into place. It was almost as I heard God whispering to me, I see you, Charlotte. I see the fat sacrifices you made every day, even when no one around you does. No act of kindness you've done, no sequin you've sewn on, no cupcake you baked is too small for me to notice and smile over. You are building great cathedrals, but you can't see it right now. what it will become. At times, my invisibility feels like an affliction, but it's not a disease that is erasing my life. It is the cure of the disease of my own self-centeredness. It is the antidote to my strong, stubborn pride. I keep the right perspective when I see myself as a great builder, as one of the people who show up at the job that they will never see finished, to work on something that their name will never be on. The writer of the book went on as far to say that no cathedrals could ever be built in our lifetime because there are so few people willing to sacrifice to that degree. When I really think about it, I don't want my son to tell his friend he's bringing home from college for the weekend, my mom gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning, bakes homemade pies, and then she hand bastes a turkey for 3 hours and presses all the linens in the table. That would mean I built a shrine or a monument to myself. I just want him to come home. And then, if there is anything more to say to their friend, you're gonna love it here. As mothers, we are building great cathedrals. We cannot be seen if we're doing it right. And one day, if it's very possible, that world will marvel, not only what we have built, but in the beauty that has been added to the world by the sacrifices of the invisible women. Thank you, Mark.
Oh, thank you, Karen. That wasn't the story we talked about, but I'm glad I got to
Oh,
hear
I
this
had
one.
the other one. I couldn't remember which one. That was the other one.
That's okay. Save it for
This
another
one
time.
is a little more religious, and that's why I thought maybe.
Those of you that are on my email, that receive emails from me, I will email you the other story if Karen doesn't mind.
No.
Because it's wonderful also. And here we are, just after 8:30. Our 90-minute program is complete with that. And lots of great comments have been coming into the chat. And if you want to contact me or get on my mailing list, my phone number and email are in the chat so that you can contact me. Andy, who's going to be host next month? Is there a theme? You want to say something? Anybody? Is Andy still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here. Sorry. Next month, Linda Kennedy is going to be the host.
Ooh.
And I'm not sure what the theme is going to be. Is she here still? She was here earlier. Anyway, so I'm sure it's going to be great. I know she likes fairy tales and stuff like that. So we'll see. You know, maybe it'll be some fun stuff like that.
Well, thank you all for wonderful stories, well told and very touching and heartfelt and moving. I just think, like the comments are saying, I think this was a wonderful session, and maybe the topic had something to do with that. But thank you all.
And everybody can feel free to unmute themselves now if you have something to talk about. We'll be online here for a little bit just to chat and
So I have a question.
Hey, everybody.
Okay. I have a question. Mike had mentioned that in the background you can hear the fish tank.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. I don't think it's a fish tank.
It sounds like an aqua lung. It sounds like some kind of breathing. That's why we thought it was the air in your fish tank.
Yeah, the sound is not coming through right now as you speak, Ed. So
No?
I imagine that it was the pump or the filter in your fish tank.
Did it go through the entire story?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, there was a weird kind of focus thing too going on. It looked
Yeah,
like
it was like a background whistle is kind of what I thought it was, like a woo whistle kind of thing.
Weird. All right. Well, I got to figure out what that is all about.
It's
I
the
didn't
joys
hear
of
it.
this
I didn't hear that.
technology.
Yeah.
Dave, when you were speaking, there was a little tagline saying Dave's bandwidth is low.
Oh, yeah.
Those sound like fighting words.
I would like to say something.
Sure.
This is the first time that I've ever told on Zoom, and I've enjoyed the whole thing, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much for
Good to
joining us,
see you,
Gail.
Gail. Good to see you.
Good to see you again.
Yes.
Marion, thank you for sharing again. I really enjoyed I enjoyed all the stories.
Thank
Ed,
you.
your mother sounds like my mother, and I lost my mother the same year you lost your mother. So
John, your stories are really getting professional. You are really developing skills. You're a newbie really to this genre. So fantastic. I appreciate your stories, your talent.
Good.
yeah.
Amen.
Yeah, John, this evening, John, you really used your facial gestures and your hands to enhance your story. Really added to your message. It was great.
Well, thank you.
And David, you always use lots of gestures. You're a great storyteller, and I love that you could stand up. I have to figure if I could stand up, I guess I could turn my tablet lengthwise, and maybe then I would be able to get more. I'll have to test it out. Maybe next time, Andy, if I'll check in early with you and we can test how I can stand, if you don't mind.
No, no.
The one thing I want to mention is as you stand up, you get further from your device. And so like Ed, you sound great when you're sitting down. When you stand up, volume's a little soft. I know I don't have the best computer, but whenever we do stand up and get further from the mic, we need to compensate with volume.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All righty.
Definitely.
Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, I could turn up the volume on my device when I go to talk and then turn it back down.
Yeah. I may miss the next event. I get to have lovely hip replacement surgery on June 14th.
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna love it.
So maybe I'll tell a story. I'll drugged out on some opiate or something.
Okay, well, that'll be a
Hey,
story
you
in
will
itself.
be up and walking around within hours, literally an hour after my friend had his surgery. I went in and he was already up out of bed and had walked to the bathroom.
Yeah. I've
Wow.
heard that too.
I
Yeah,
have a
there's
little-
no more to, feel sorry for yourself. You're up, you're out, and within 3
Right.
days, you're home.
I have a
Is your
story just
daughter
like
gonna
that.
come over and be with you for a while?
Yeah, my stepson's gonna come move in for a week with me.
Oh, that'll be good.
Cool.
Not that you won't be able to get out, you'll just
No.
need help
Right.
getting yourself up and out of the chair. But once you're up, you're walking around. That you'll be a new person. It'll be a new person.
I'll run to the board meeting.
Absolutely, you will.
Hey,
My
Mark,
friend just had her hip replaced in the morning, and like Karen said, they had her up and walking. The nurses were really careful, had a walker there and everything to get her out of bed and get her to put weight on it. And the surgeon just happened to be walking down that particular floor at that particular time. And he saw her and he said, "What are you doing with that thing?" pointing to the walker. He said, "I just gave you a new, perfectly good hip this morning. Get rid of that thing." And so instead of bending over the walker, she stood up straight and walked.
yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing, isn't it, huh?